Hello, and welcome to Nightmare Masterclass. The Rick and Morty simulation theory is by far my most popular video, and I've gotten quite a few comments that I think are worth addressing. And I also have some additional thoughts about the simulation theory that I'd like to discuss. The first thing I want to say is, and this is not in relation to any one specific comment, I want you guys to try and wrap your heads around this simulation theory in reference to real life. I didn't see this discussed very much in the comments, and I think it is a very compelling line of thought. I'm going to reiterate the argument. So, philosopher Nick Bostrom asserts that one of three premises must be true. 1. All human and human-level civilizations destroy themselves before reaching the stage where advanced simulations are possible. 2. All human and human-level civilizations lose interest in developing advanced simulations. And 3. We are almost certainly living inside a simulation. I want you to consider these three premises and let me know which one you think is most likely. The reason I'm reiterating the argument is because I think it's a little tricky to wrap your head around. I'll tell you what I think about these respective premises. I think it's entirely probable that many human-level civilizations go extinct before developing advanced simulation technology. But considering that we are finding Earth-like planets every day, and we've only just begun the search, I'd say the likelihood of there being a vast, incomprehensibly high number of civilizations out there is strong. And this is just in reference to our own observable universe. Who knows what else is out there? The point is, even if something like 99% of human-level civilizations blow themselves up before reaching the stage where they develop advanced simulations, that still leaves 1% of an incredibly high number of such civilizations. Let's talk about premise 2, i.e. that some human-level civilizations reach this stage where advanced simulations are possible, but they all lose interest in the development of such technology. I don't know about you, but I find this to be highly unlikely. After all, our own society is highly interested in video games and virtual reality, and there aren't any signs of this slowing down. Granted, if we take the conceit that there are an enormous amount of human-level civilizations out there, Earth itself is a pretty small sampling size, but it's data nonetheless and it should be considered. As such, I think premise 2 seems highly unlikely. So, if you follow Bostrom's logic, and premise 1 and 2 are not true, premise 3, i.e. that we are almost certainly living inside a simulation, must be true. Now, it's entirely possible that my logic is flawed in some way that I'm not seeing, but I think it's important to frame the argument in relation to probabilities. And that rule of thumb also applies to Rick and Morty. So that's really just a long way of saying that in relation to this TV show, the question we have to ask is as follows. What is the likelihood that Rick is still inside a simulation towards the end of this episode? Essentially, we need to use Bayesian inference to evaluate which possibility is more likely. Now, if you're not familiar with Bayes' theorem, you can look it up, but it basically entails the updating of an estimation of a probability for a hypothesis based on evidence or new information that becomes available. So basically, you're just changing what you believe based on newly available evidence. As I pointed out in my previous video, there's quite a bit of circumstantial evidence in this episode that supports the idea that Rick is still inside a simulation. Let's do a quick overview of one major point. Rick points out that he thinks he's not inside the Federation's best simulation software. He says this towards the beginning of the episode, so it logically follows that such simulation technology exists. If that's the case, why isn't the Federation using their best technology on Rick? Now I just want to address a few comments. A few people pointed out that Rick and Morty have done an episode on simulations previously, specifically the episode titled M. Night Shyamalan's. So the question would be, why would they rehash this plot device? Well, for starters, the multiple universe conceit has been used a number of times throughout the show, but it's always been in service of the story. So I don't think there's any problem with reusing the simulation conceit if it works in service of the story. This brings me to my next point. The entire purpose of the Federation simulation is to obtain Rick's formula for interdimensional travel. Clearly, the best way to do this would be to convince Rick that he's not inside a simulation. This would be so he lets his guard down and possibly gives away the information. We can get some indication of how simulations work in this fictional universe by taking a look at that previous episode, M. Night Shyamalan's. When Jerry is inside the simulation, the software works because it compensates for his feelings of inadequacy, lulling him into a state of total complacency. The simulation pacifies the subject by catering to the subject's ego. Keep that in mind. I believe this is what's happening to Rick in the Season 3 premiere. The only distinction is that the software is far more advanced. The software used in Jerry's simulation is clearly inferior to the technology used in Rick's simulation. Not to mention, in Jerry's case, they were using a limited amount of processing power, but nonetheless, the same principles apply. Whereas in the case of Jerry, the simulation works by convincing him that he's a successful ad man. The simulation in Rick's case is operating on the basis that Rick's ego is considerably greater, and as such, the scale of the simulation is also greater. Moreover, because Rick is considerably more intelligent than Jerry, the simulation in Rick's case must also be considerably more conniving. A number of commenters said they felt like it would be a cop-out if Rick was still in a simulation at the end of this episode. Now, I don't quite agree with that, but I do understand the general sentiment. If everything you've seen is just proven to be a total lie, then how do you trust anything the writers are doing in future episodes? But if you think that's a cop-out, why don't you also think that Rick fixing everything because he's an unparalleled genius is a cop-out? Think about what happens in the Season 2 finale. Rick turns himself in to protect his family. If the events of the Season 3 premiere are to be taken at face value, then the fact that this was somehow Rick's plan all along is, well, a total cop-out. It doesn't work in service of the story that was playing out in the Season 2 finale. In fact, it totally undermines the development of Rick as a character. To me, it makes a lot more sense that the simulation is screwing with Rick's head, making him think that he is virtually omnipotent. Though, of course, whether or not either of these scenarios are a cop-out depends entirely on how the story plays out in Season 3. So I'm not really sure if this discussion of what's a cop-out and what isn't a cop-out is really worthwhile until we have more context. Another commenter asks, if it's all a simulation, how come we have a side story with Morty where Rick isn't anywhere? My response to this is that, well, it's a simulation. Even the very basic simulation software on Earth has multiple events occurring in different places. Look at SimCity. You can have a tornado going on in one part of the city, but everything is totally fine in another part. In The Sims, you can have two characters interacting in the kitchen and another one taking a dump in the bathroom. This isn't a flaw in the system. It's inherent by virtue of the simulation's design. It's actually what makes it a novel technology. A few comments pointed out a theory that's gotten some traction as of late, i.e. that C-137 is not actually Rick's home. That is to say, it's not the universe in which he originated. This is a compelling theory, and I think there is some evidence to support it. Nonetheless, it's a little outside the scope of this topic, but I will have a link to a very well-reasoned video which supports this argument. Check out the video description. Okay, so those are just a few things that I wanted to address. If you have any compelling counter-arguments, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you want to see future videos where I address comments, go ahead and let me know. I don't know if this is a thing people like. I just felt like I got enough interesting comments on my previous video to merit another discussion on the topic. Okay, I know this one's been a little bit more informal, but I will have a new video up likely towards the beginning of next month, and I'll be doing something a little different in that video, so I hope you guys like it. Stay tuned. Thank you, and good night.